What if the more clearly you see the world, the more alone you become? That question lingers in the shadows of every seeker who's dared to look beyond the veil. In classrooms and on stages, society claims to celebrate the pursuit of truth. Yet, history tells a more sinister tale. Those who truly see, who speak what they see, are rarely welcomed. They are punished, silenced, forgotten. Take a moment to consider Galileo, the man who turned his telescope toward the heavens and saw a universe not centered around Earth, but around the sun. A simple observation, a mathematical conclusion. And yet, for this, he was tried by the Inquisition and placed under house arrest for the remainder of his life. Not because he was wrong, but because he was right. Then there was Socrates, the gadfly of Athens, who questioned the moral certainties of his time. He dismantled illusions with only words, asking questions that unmasked the hypocrisy of power. For this, he was sentenced to death, not for any crime, but for corrupting the youth and impiety. In other words, for thinking too deeply, for being too awake. Fast forward to modern times, whistleblowers, journalists, rogue academics. They're hailed as heroes in documentaries, but in life, they are often outcasts. The systems that claim to serve truth often have a breaking point, a threshold beyond which inquiry becomes a threat. Truth, it turns out, is not a virtue. It is a disruption. Institutions, governments, religions, corporations are not built to love truth. They are built to survive. And survival demands stability, coherence, narrative control. Truth, in its raw form, is an acid. It dissolves the polished veneers that hold civilizations together. It burns through mythology and leaves uncomfortable ruins. Imagine discovering that the very structure of your beliefs is a lie. That what you were taught to admire, success, obedience, certainty, was engineered not to elevate your consciousness, but to domesticate it, to make you manageable, predictable, harmless. This is the sacred betrayal, because it is not your enemies who misled you. It is the systems you trusted most, schools that taught you to memorize, not to question, religions that sold comfort, not awakening, media that filtered reality into palatable illusions. The betrayal isn't that these systems failed, it's that they were never designed for truth in the first place. They were designed for control. There is a deep loneliness that arises when this realization dawns, a kind of spiritual vertigo. You begin to see the outlines of the cage, and suddenly, those around you, still asleep, still loyal to the dream, feel distant. Not because you're better, but because you're no longer on the same frequency. And here's the paradox. The more awake you become, the harder it is to connect. You start to notice the little lies that lubricate daily life. The performative, pleasantries, the unspoken obedience, the rituals of distraction. And as you drift further from the consensus reality, your voice, once eager to share, begins to quiet. Not because you have nothing to say, but because you know most can't. Or, won't hear it. This is not cynicism. It is the emotional cost of clarity. Nietzsche once said, "Sometimes people don't want to hear the truth because they don't want their illusions destroyed." But what he didn't say is how it feels to be the one holding the truth. The isolation, the doubt, the grief, because when you wake up, it's not into a community. It's into exile. So this is where our story begins, not with the glory of enlightenment, but with the fallout. The social exile of those who refuse to play along. The quiet agony of those who can't unknow what they've seen. The world will call them paranoid, rebellious, dangerous. But look closely at the pattern across centuries and civilizations, and you'll see. These are the ones who stood too close to the fire of truth. And like moths to a flame, they paid the price for seeing too clearly. But perhaps the greater question is not why they were punished, but why we, collectively, feared what they saw. Every civilization begins with a story. Not an objective truth, but a chosen narrative. Something mythic, sacred, unquestionable. And it must be believed, not because it's accurate, but because it holds people together. The need for unity is more urgent than the need for truth. This is the quiet architecture of society. Illusions so old, so repeated, that we stop noticing their illusions at all. Freud, in Civilization and Its Discontents, argued that to build any form of social order, the individual must be suppressed, instincts repressed, desires redirected. We are not born moral. We are made moral through rules that conflict with nature. But repression creates friction, anxiety, guilt. And to manage this tension, society offers a compromise, comforting fictions. You are free, it says. You are safe. You are good. As long as you obey. These are not lies told to deceive. They are illusions told to soothe. They operate like anesthesia, numbing the raw edge of our animal impulses and existential dread. We are not taught to think, we are taught to conform. Because too much clarity would unravel the entire fabric of cooperation. Carl Jung took this further with his concept of the persona, the mask each of us wears to meet the world. This mask is not fake in the traditional sense, it is functional. The employee becomes agreeable, the partner becomes gentle, the citizen becomes obedient. It's not always who we are, but it's who we must be to belong. The persona is a lie we wear to survive social expectations. But if the individual requires a mask, so does the collective. Emil Durkheim recognized this in his study of norms and rituals. He saw that social order isn't maintained by facts, it's maintained by shared belief. What we celebrate, what we condemn, what we call normal, these are not truths, but consensus hallucinations, powerful ones. A nation doesn't exist in nature. It exists in the minds of its citizens. Remove the belief and the structure vanishes. So we invent rituals. We tell origin stories. We enshrine values in symbols, flags, anthems, slogans. Not because they are universally true, but because they are emotionally unifying. This is the paradox. The more a belief binds people together, the less it can tolerate scrutiny. Religions have always understood this. They do not present their doctrines as metaphors, but as revelations. Stories of divine intervention, moral destiny, cosmic justice. Whether literal or not becomes irrelevant. What matters is that they stabilize the psyche, offer transcendence, and justify the rules of conduct. They explain suffering, purpose, and death. They make an uncontrollable universe feel narratively ordered. Even atheistic societies replace the divine with secular myths, progress, science, the state. National identities follow the same pattern. Every country teaches its children a version of history that flatters the homeland. Heroes are purified. Victories are exaggerated. Atrocities are minimized or erased. This is not about truth. It's about loyalty. To love your country, you must believe in its greatness, even when the facts suggest otherwise. Dissent is punished not for being wrong, but for being disruptive. Meritocracy is perhaps the most subtle fiction of all. The idea that anyone can succeed through hard work alone. It's the story that keeps the poor working, the middle class striving, and the rich believing they earned it all. But the reality is far more complex. Structural barriers, inherited privilege, and systemic bias all shape the playing field. Yet we cling to the illusion because it preserves hope. And without hope, the engine of ambition stalls. None of this is accidental. These illusions function like glue. They hold together a species that is otherwise prone to conflict, division, and chaos. The story is what binds the tribe, but here lies the danger. When someone questions the story, they don't just challenge an idea, they threaten the entire cohesion of the group. This is why truth, when it arrives, is rarely welcomed. It's not just inconvenient, it's subversive. It makes the tribe feel unsafe. The dissenter becomes a threat not because of what they say, but because of what their clarity might unravel. Society, then, does not merely prefer fiction, it requires it. The lie is not an aberration, it is the foundation, and those who dare to expose it often find themselves cast out, not because they are wrong, but because they are right at the wrong time. This is why truth-telling is not seen as noble. It's seen as dangerous, and the more systemic the lie, the more violent the reaction to its exposure. So the thinker who refuses to wear the mask, the citizen who questions the myth, the individual who resists the collective script, they are not just alone. They are treated as pathogens in a body that wants to stay asleep. Because if survival depends on fiction, then truth becomes the enemy. Every empire has its dissidents, every age its heretics, and every truth its cost. History remembers them as symbols, statues carved in stone, names in textbooks. But before they were icons, they were people, flesh and blood, with families, fears, doubts, and yet they stood up, knowing the punishment was exile, ridicule, even death. Socrates didn't lead an army. He asked questions, questions that cut through the illusions of Athens, its politics, its morality, its gods. For this, he was sentenced to die. His choice? Renounce his pursuit of truth or drink the hemlock. He chose the poison. Jesus, too, became unbearable to the social order, not for violence, but for compassion paired with confrontation. He disrupted the temple, challenged religious authority, offered a kingdom not of this world. The result? Crucifixion. Not by criminals, but by consensus, cheered by the very crowd that once welcomed him. In modern times, the names change, but the pattern does not. Edward Snowden saw the surveillance state from within. He didn't guess. He knew. And he showed the world. The reaction wasn't gratitude. It was condemnation, accusation. He became stateless, both hunted and ignored. Julian Assange opened the vault of war and secrecy. He didn't fabricate the atrocities, he published them. And for that, he has spent over a decade in confinement, first in an embassy, now in prison, while governments scramble to redefine what counts as a crime. These are not isolated cases. They are echoes of the same archetype. The truth-teller is never neutral. They become a mirror, and societies don't like what they see in the mirror. Why? René Girard offers a haunting insight. In his mimetic theory, he suggests that human desire is not born in isolation. We want what others want. This creates competition, rivalry, conflict. And to restore order, a scapegoat must be found. Someone to absorb the tension, to be sacrificed. Not because they are guilty, but because their removal promises relief. The whistleblower, then, is the perfect scapegoat. They rupture the illusion. They provoke discomfort. They do not play along. And so the tribe, unified by the threat they pose, turns against them. Not because they lie, but because they refuse to. There is another mechanism at play: cognitive dissonance. When someone reveals a truth that contradicts what we believe, we are faced with a choice: change our worldview or attack the source of the contradiction. Most choose the latter. It's easier to call Snowden a traitor than to confront the implications of mass surveillance. Easier to condemn Assange than to reckon with what his leaks revealed. Easier to crucify the messenger than to hear the message. These individuals are not rebels in the traditional sense. They are not seeking to overthrow for power. They are cultural antibodies, rejecting infection, calling out dysfunction. But the immune system of society misfires. It treats them as a disease. This is the whistleblower's curse. Not just to see what others cannot, but to bear the burden of that vision alone. To speak what must be said, knowing you may not be believed, and even if you are, knowing you will be punished for it. And yet they do it, not because they're fearless, but because something inside refuses to stay silent. A loyalty not to comfort, but to conscience. A faith, perhaps misguided, that the truth is sacred, even when the world finds it unbearable. We often romanticize these figures after the fact, but while they lived, they were pariahs, demonized, forgotten. They didn't just lose careers, they lost homes, families, sanity. Their crime was clarity, and their sentence was solitude. Through them, the abstract becomes real. We stop talking about systems and begin to see faces, lives unraveled, not because they were wrong, but because they were right too soon. There is a strange kind of silence in the modern world, a silence not born from peace but from saturation, a world not void of noise, but drowned in it. Opinions, updates, headlines, algorithms all weaving an intricate web of perception. But who decides what's real in a world where reality is filtered, framed, and fed to us? In the early 20th century, Edward Bernays, the nephew of Sigmund Freud, understood something chilling. If Freud explored the unconscious desires of the individual, Bernays realized those same desires could be manipulated on a mass scale. He coined a new term: public relations, a sanitized version of propaganda. He believed democracy could be managed, not through force, but through suggestion. If you control what people see and hear, you can control what they believe. And he was right. From selling cigarettes to selling wars, Bernays helped build the scaffolding of modern mass persuasion. But it wasn't just about selling products, it was about selling realities. The 20th century saw this unfold on terrifying scales. Totalitarian regimes mastered the art of shaping perception. Hannah Arendt warned that when politics abandons truth, all that's left is control. In such systems, facts are not argued, they are eliminated. Reality becomes a tool, molded to fit the needs of power. But what happens when that machinery of perception doesn't fade with the fall of fascism or communism, but evolves? Today, the architecture of influence is more subtle, but no less effective. It doesn't need jackboots or secret police. It uses engagement metrics, trending topics, fact-checkers, and the illusion of choice. The average person believes they are informed, but they are informed by design. Psychologist Matthias Desmet speaks of mass formation psychosis. It's not a conspiracy, it's a pattern. In times of uncertainty, anxiety grows. People become isolated, afraid, longing for clarity. And when a dominant narrative emerges, something that offers meaning, structure, a sense of purpose, they cling to it, regardless of its accuracy. Once a group locks into a shared illusion, dissent becomes intolerable. The outlier threatens not just ideas, but identity. This is why people defend lies as if their lives depend on them, because psychologically they do. The media-industrial complex plays a critical role. Repetition creates familiarity. Familiarity creates belief. And belief, when reinforced by community, becomes reality. This isn't just manipulation, it's immersion. Censorship completes the loop, not by deleting every dissenting voice, but by drowning them in noise. By marginalizing them, by labeling them dangerous, irrational, or irrelevant. The goal is not to convince everyone, it's to isolate the thinker, to make the seeker feel insane for noticing the seams in the narrative. It's the genius of modern control. Instead of punishing you for questioning, it makes sure no one hears you at all. What we call consensus is often just conformity enforced by social risk. A journalist avoids stories that could get them blacklisted. A scientist shapes their findings to fit funding. A teacher teaches the test, not the truth. Bit by bit, truth becomes inconvenient, then irrelevant, then extinct. And those who continue to speak it, they are not just viewed as rebels. They are viewed as threats. Threats to safety, threats to unity, threats to the curated world people have come to depend on. This is where the line between delusion and deception blurs. It's not just that people are passively misled. It's that there is a system, an ecosystem, that actively engineers belief. Not out of malice necessarily, but out of necessity. Because in a world so complex, so chaotic, people crave certainty. and someone will always be willing to sell it to them. The seeker of truth is not simply swimming upstream. They are trying to see clearly in a world designed to blind them. Their clarity does not inspire others. It unsettles them. It pulls at the delicate threads of a shared illusion, and for that, they are not tolerated. They are exiled, not because they're wrong, but because they are alone.